today we are talking about Spreadsheet Link for interior designers, and as always, let's start out with what some of the issues are that we can run into here. So, Revit can be an excellent design tool if one's comfortable using it. You know, I use Revit on a daily basis. I feel very comfortable in and out of Revit using different aspects of it. But the problem is many interior designers do not feel comfortable in Revit. Either they were trained in AutoCAD and Photoshop and Illustrator, and they never got Revit training. They've been thrown into the Revit world, but never really were trained on how to use it. That can be a very uncomfortable way of trying to learn how to use a tool. Or maybe for what they're doing is just not super efficient. You know, plan documentation can still be great, and for the most part, it's pretty easy to do. But you know, still, Excel tends to feel a lot more comfortable for a lot of the data entry that we do. Oftentimes, even for architects and engineers, it's the most efficient way to do a lot of data entry and data manipulation in Revit. Revit schedules, in some cases, though they're automatic with their information, can sometimes just be a little bit unfriendly in how they let you actually manipulate the data. So let's talk about how we can leverage Excel with collaboration to collaborate with Revit so that the interior designers can get sort of a more smooth workflow and get some of that data entry where they're doing a lot of information entry done much more rapidly. And there's actually a couple of other areas we're going to take a look at today as well. So, nice thing about Spreadsheet Link here that we're going to work with today is it can directly leverage your Revit schedules. So whatever you have in your Revit schedule, you can directly push out to Excel and let them leverage, let them use. It can be sort of more of an automated export even if you want it to be. So it makes it really quick and easy. You can export all the data from Revit out. Then after you've modified that information in Excel, using the power of Excel and some of its autofill workflows there, you can re-import that information back into Revit. And we're going to use this for 3 very explicit workflows today. We're going to take and use the essential kind of schedule, export, edit, import functionality that I just described for room finish schedules. We're also going to leverage this to kind of automatically calculate ceiling heights, and we're going to add in the option that everybody's been asking for a while for varies, because that oftentimes that information appears directly in my room finish schedules, and it's usually entered by the interior designers and or kind of partially collaborated with the architects, but for the most part, I see a lot of my interior designers that I collaborate with being the responsible party for entering this, and they have to go through and query a lot of that information manually. So I can try and pull some of it automatically, show you how I do that today. And then also, I've been talking with a lot of interior designers lately about room data sheets and some workflows that they want to be able to pull. And I've been kind of brainstorming some techniques. And so today I'm going to show you sort of a very preliminary workflow that's just begun in development. So it's not 100% refined yet. I'm just going to show you some concepts and get some feedback if you want to throw some feedback my way in the comments at the end. So those are the 3 things we're going to do today. Basic schedule, export, edit, and import. We're going to do auto-calculated ceiling heights, and we're going to do some room data sheet examples here and kind of talk about how some of that can work. So with that, let's jump into Revit and take a look at what we've got. So I'm in one of my typical floor plans that I like to use, our office building in Bloomington. And if I go here to the finished plan over here, I've got some furniture showing up. I've got some room objects out here. And if I click on some of these room objects, I've made for myself a few parameters, a few project parameters that apply to these rooms. They're just text-based parameters, things like floor materials and wall finishes. Now, there's some other things in here that are, probably identity data-based, that are things like the ceiling finish that's down in identity data. There's the wall finish, which I'm going to ignore, and the floor finish and some things like that. I'll use some of those. I'll use some of my custom parameters. And I've also made myself a couple of extra parameters here called ceiling height, which is just it's a text-based value. I can type out whatever I want there. There is a calculated ceiling height because nothing in the room actually tells me how tall this room really is. It tells me what the unbound height is. It tells me it's 14 feet, but that's just because it's going from level to level. If you actually take a look at a section cut of a room, the room itself stops at the ceiling generally. Now, if the ceiling has multiple elevations, what I'm going to try to do is extract from that the highest elevation of the room and report that back. And obviously, if there's multiple elevations, the interior designer or whomever can check a box that says varies, and then that'll make it so that this ceiling height will think that it varies. And it'll actually report varies into the actual schedule. So I can get kind of the best of both worlds. If the ceiling height is consistent, it'll use the calculated value. Otherwise, it'll just use the basic ceiling height. That'll be something we get to in the second step. That'll be a little bit later on. First, though, if I was, an interior designer going through and working on this file, what I might need to do is click on each individual room as I'm working through. I probably would want to have a room tag out here as well. I can also click on it and see what the room number happens to be here. I can know what work set it happens to be on, what the room name is. But I have to go through and I have to start manually entering some information. So if this is going to be like carpet 1, I can enter that, but that, I have to go through each room and do that. Or you guys are like, what are you doing? I would normally go to a schedule and do that. Well, that's true. I can go to a schedule. So I can go over here and I have my room finish schedule ready to go. This is from my sort of standard template in my project. And I could take, say, my training room number 2 and put in, carpet 2. But if I CPT, I suppose there, carpet 2. But if I wanted to take this, and maybe I have most of the rooms out here are going to be, maybe they're all in order. All these offices here are going to have the same carpet. I can't just easily autofill this like I would in Excel. So I have to manually type it out or manually go through and keep dropping down a list. And as this list gets longer, scrolling through a long list and trying to choose the one that I want to make sure it's all consistent. So that's a little bit more cumbersome. And if I needed to, say, for each of my walls have a similar finish on each of the 4 walls in a particular room, I can't just autofill across very easily. I have to manually copy and paste values and manually click into individual cells. I can't hit enter or use my arrow keys. So it's not Excel. It's still, obviously editing back to the original room, but it doesn't have quite the functionality that Excel has. So what I'm going to do is take this exact schedule, and I'm going to kick it out to Excel so I can more easily edit it. So I'm going to go to my Revit Express tools here at the top. I'm going to pull up Spreadsheet Link. When I pull up Spreadsheet Link, one of the features that we have, instead of me manually rebuilding all these fields in the order that I want them, is the ability to go down to my categories list down here at the lower left and choose either categories, type information for type objects. We've done seminars on that before, and schedule information. And this is what I want. I want to source my export based on a schedule. So all these schedules over here to the left, most of those will show up in this list right here. And I could go ahead and grab things like the room finish schedule and add that across. Now, it doesn't do an exact format. It does grab all of the fields, but it doesn't do the exact same format because there's fields in Revit that might be hidden. And so those fields that might be hidden may potentially show up here in this export, like my calculated ceiling height, my ceiling height varies options. Those might show up in here. Not really that big of a deal. For the most part, I'm going to focus on the left-hand portion over here, provided that my order is nice and neat. And in this case, it's pretty decent. I do probably want to go through and actually sort these based on room number. So I'm going to go here to my sorting and just make sure that I'm sorting based on the number. And in this case, it doesn't like my sorting. That's okay. I'll ignore that for right now. Not that big of a deal. What I am going to do, though, is I'm going to basically take this and save this out to Excel so I can do, well, whatever I want with it. So I'm going to go ahead and save this to Excel, to my desktop here. And this might just be, a room finish schedule. I might put a project number on there. I might not, whatever. It doesn't really matter for my purposes right now. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And the BIM Project Suite is going to pop up and say, do you want to open that in its default application? I'm going to go ahead and answer yes to this. This will let me open this up in Revit directly, or sorry, in Excel directly. And now I can go through and start leveraging the power of Excel to start filling information out. So if I wanted to take this value here, I can copy this from one cell and just start pasting it around, no big deal. If my finish here, maybe I want to do like a wood -1, and then I want to put a finish on here of STN-1 or something, so it's got a specific stain or a specific finish on it. I want to copy this around, so I can actually take more than one cell, of course, and kind of copy those around. That's just normal Excel work, but it's much easier for me to do it here than it is in the Revit environment because I can copy more than one field. I can autofill information. If I have PNT-1 here, and I want to say copy this maybe once, I want to autofill this down, that's very easy to do. No big deal. Real easy to go ahead and just copy that information around. So now I can go ahead and save this. And I can close this down, and then from the Spreadsheet Link window, which maybe I've closed, maybe I haven't, either way. In fact, I can just shut the entire window down, because usually I'd give this off to an interior designer if I'm an architect and I want them to fill some work out. If they didn't know how to export this, I could certainly do it for them. Give it to them, let them work on this. Not going to really save my settings because it doesn't really matter. I'm just pulling a schedule in. It's not that big of a deal. And what I'm going to do from my Spreadsheet Link here, when they are done doing their editing, I'm just going to open up the spreadsheet that I gave them, which is that room finish schedule that I threw out here on my desktop. They'll have all that information and whatever they've modified, and I can just apply the active worksheet back to my project. Now, as I do this, those exact same rooms are going to get updated in my project. The actual data will show up inside of here. It updated 6 objects. It left 148 of them unchanged. That's fine. But it's gone through and it's made that update, so they're able to go through and very easily modify, the information in Excel in an environment that they feel comfortable working within. And I get the benefit of that because now my information in my Revit model is up to date. If I went and found that one of those offices, they'd actually have that information inside that room space, so that's kind of entering information back to the building information model. So simple workflow. I go to Spreadsheet Link, I select a schedule, it pulls all the fields in. I can save that out to Excel, let somebody go to town, manipulate it all day long, modify that information, and then ultimately I can pull that data right back into Revit. Nice, easy workflow. All right. Next, what I want to talk about is how I can get this ceiling height information here to be a bit more automatic. It would be kind of tedious if I had to go through every single room and manually enter a ceiling height. Revit already has that information. I should be able to leverage it somehow. Now, the first workflow, where I basically take information from Revit from a schedule, pull it to Excel, and bring it right back in, that's a really easy workflow that pretty much anybody using Revit can be trained how to do. If you've got a schedule, you've already given them the field that they need. All they have to do is open up Spreadsheet Link, choose the schedule, and they're ready and off and running. In fact, sometimes if I'm, say, working with interior designers, I'll have them work directly inside a Spreadsheet Link here, and they can just go ahead and pull up their schedules directly right here. So I'll go ahead and grab that room finish schedule again, pull in the information. On my second monitor over here, it's going through and just telling me that it's getting the data. I can actually do my data manipulation right here. If I wanted to, say, take all these paints and copy this across, I can do that. In this case, it's going to do some auto numbering, but whatever. I can do my data manipulation right here. Or I can just simply do copy and paste right from here as well. I can paste this multiple times if I need to, ACT1, whatever. Do some auto filling here, no big deal. So that's pretty easy to do, and I can, again, either save this out or just directly apply the active worksheet back to my project, and I don't ever actually even have to go out to Excel if I don't want to. We replicate the Excel information and sort of some of the Excel workflow right here inside of the Spreadsheet Link environment. So I'm going to apply the active worksheet out. Of course, it's going to update those 6 objects again, and I now have some new information in my project. So again, very simple workflow that pretty much any user can leverage pretty directly. It's pretty easy for them to be able to get into the Spreadsheet Link environment and start manipulating. Now, let's go a little bit more advanced. This is something that you might want to kind of pre-set up for an interior designer, unless the interior designer themselves is pretty confident in their skills in Excel and understanding some of the formulaic work that they can do. Let's take a look at what I can do here. I have pre-built for myself 2 ceiling height schedules. I did this just because I kind of worked through the workflow in my mind a couple of times, figured out the best way to make this work. My ceiling height 1 schedule right here, I'm going to export this and I'm going to strip all of the units off. And what I'm going to do is calculate my ceiling height. Now, originally what I thought about doing was taking the volume of my space and dividing that by the area of the space to try and see if I can get the height of the space. And that didn't work out so well because in Revit there's some goofy things that sometimes happen where it calculates, say a finished floor underneath my room that subtracts that from the volume. So it's not actually truly getting the full height that I would want to document. In some cases, if there are multi-elevations of ceilings, I would get some random weird numbers inside of there. It's not the top elevation, it's not the bottom ceiling elevation, it's some average in the middle based on how much of the surface area is high and how much of the surface area is low, and it's really inconsistent with my results I got back. So I decided that I would dig into Spreadsheet Link and see if it can give me some information for this. And it turns out that it can. So after I got this calculated up, what I did is I made myself a second ceiling height so that I could do some extra calculations without the unit value strip, so I could actually get the feet and inches here to be pulled across to my ceiling height area. And I have some little check boxes, some little yes/no parameters that I've built into this that basically lets me say that the ceiling height varies. And if this is checked, it completely ignores what the calculated ceiling height is and just puts the word varies in here. And by doing that, I can actually get ceiling heights and varies in the same field. And the formatting here for ceiling height looks just like feet and inches without any extra Excel work. So let me show it to you in just a minute. Actually, let me show it to you right now. I'm going to build up two exports, one with ceiling height, one that's going to do the calculation of my ceiling height. It's going to do the calculating over here. I'm going to run that process a second time to get that value copied over to here. Yeah, unfortunately, it has to be a two-step process right now. We'll take a look at possibly refining that a little bit, but for right now, it's going to be a two-step process. So I'm going to go to my Spreadsheet Link environment, and I'm going to pull in those two schedules. And I like using schedules because it lets me take the exact same information and based on the name of the schedule, export it twice and manipulate it in two different ways sometimes. So I'm going to take both of those schedules and kick them out. So there's my Schedule 1. There's my Schedule 2. Now I'm going to actually add a little bit of information to Schedule 1, and I'm going to save my settings out so that an interior designer later on wouldn't have to keep reinventing this process every single time. As long as they have my schedules, they should be good to go. So on my ceiling height 1 over here, what I want to do is I want to look through a couple of the extra parameters that I can get with Spreadsheet Link that I cannot get with Revit. One of those properties is the upper bounding box of the room. There's the maximum Z, which is the top elevation of my room. Bounding box max Z. I'm going to add that over here. Now what you'll notice is that it gives me that value in decimal feet, and it puts a little foot marker here at the end. Now I don't want the foot marker because that's going to make my math more difficult. So what I'm going to do is go down here and grab, I'm going to turn off the unit symbols. That's going to actually turn off the unit symbols for the square foot and the cubic feet and the foot value over here. So this is a parameter that exists. This bounding box max Z exists in Revit, but it's not something that you can schedule at all. There was actually a question that just popped up. And it says, am I going to show you how I'm going to do the selection of either or and how I go with either numbers or text? And absolutely, I'm going to take you through the full process here from beginning to end of how I developed this, with the exception of I added in these parameters. Ceiling height varies I added in as a yes/no parameter in Revit as a project parameter. Okay, it's yes/no. It doesn't matter where you group it. Ceiling height varies as a yes/no parameter. I pre-built that. Ceiling height, I pre-built this as well, and I made it as a text parameter. That's key. This is a text parameter in Revit. Excel doesn't care. Excel couldn't care less of text or, feet and inches or whatever, so that doesn't matter. But I did make this, and I did make this ceiling height as text. And I'm calling it ceiling height so that the end user, if they wanted to type in something manually, they could, and it's what's going to be in the ceiling height in the schedule, so that the names match up. Over here, I made a parameter called ceiling height calculated. I grouped this underneath other, so it was kind of hidden from the end user. And this is a length value. This is going to be what I'm actually going to calculate from the properties of the room. And then the remaining two properties that I'm dealing with now, bounding box max Z, which is the upper boundary of the room in the overall space of Revit. You'll notice that right now it looks like it's the actual height of the room. I've got 14 feet, got 9 feet. Got some other dimensions inside of here. As I scroll down, you're going to start seeing things like 52 feet. You're going to see -2 feet inside of here in a couple places, and 24 feet. Those are obviously not the heights of the spaces. So what I needed was to figure out where the bottom of the space was as well. And logically, at first, I thought, well, I'll just use the bounding box minimum Z. The problem is that the physical boundary of the room isn't what I necessarily wanted, because what happened was when there was finished floors under the room, it would subtract just a little bit, like that 1/8 inch or that 1/4 inch, or there's a number of different things that can modify the bottom bounding box of a room. So I didn't want to use that one. What I wanted to use was the value that the room thought it was for its original insertion point, the position Z, where it was placed in 3D space. So I'm going to go ahead and take this position Z and add this across. And what you'll notice now is that on some of these, for example, I've got 0 feet. That means it's placed, at 0 in my building 0 elevation, and then it's 14 feet above that. Or some of these are placed at 42 feet at the bottom, and it goes up to 52 feet. So now I can do some simple math, provided that I go through and I hide my unit symbols, which I actually failed to check here a second ago. By me hiding my unit symbols now, it gives me just the decimal foot value, which is what I care about. And what I'm going to do is carry that across over here, do some math, take this value and subtract out the bottom of it, and that'll give me the actual height of the space. So I'm going to go in here and say, I want my ceiling height calculated to actually be a calculated value. And by checking this little box here in my calculated column, Spreadsheet Link automatically propagates whatever formula I put in the topmost cell all the way down. So I'm going to go in here and put in something pretty simple. Equals, which is telling Excel, or in our Spreadsheet Link program tells it, which is mimicking Excel, that I want to start a formula. So I'm going to say equals this value minus this value. So K4 minus L4. By me doing that simple math right there, and by me telling it that it's calculated, this column is calculated, I don't have to manually drag this down for however many rooms I've got. Spreadsheet Link will do that for me automatically. And so it takes this and copies this all the way down. So I've got some 9-foot tall spaces and some 14-foot tall spaces. And if I scroll down here, I've got some 10-foot high spaces down in this area. If I keep going, I've got some 8'6" or 8.5-foot high spaces down here, and so on. It just keeps running my calculation and giving me what it thinks the topmost ceiling height is for my room. Pretty decent. It does a pretty good job. Now, in some cases, some of my rooms vary because the user is going to check that varies box. So this step right here is just to allow me to get the value calculated across over to here. That's my step 1. In my second step over here, this hasn't filled out yet, but it will eventually. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make my ceiling height area equal either this value or this value. If this says that it's actually going to be a varying ceiling height, when down here when it says true, there's a couple of boxes that I intentionally checked. If it says true, I want this to say varies. If this does not say true, I want it to go over here and just use whatever the calculated value happens to be. So now what I'm going to do is go here to my ceiling height 2 and run one more calculation. I'm going to calculate my ceiling height. Now this one I'm not going to hide the unit symbols because I actually want the absolute value from over here to show up. Hopefully it'll show up in a meaningful way. We'll find out here in a moment. It might not. We're going to see if we can make it work. If it doesn't, I may have to do some extra math anyway, and then I might not need a second step. But we'll find out. I haven't actually tested this on purpose. I was going to try it live in front of you today. Again, this is a little bit of theory. So I'm going to say that this cell here, again, I'm telling it that it's a calculated cell, which means that when I put a formula here, it's going to automatically propagate all the way down. So I only have to worry about the one area here. So I'm going to say equals. Again, I'm telling it to do a formula. This is where I'm going to start asking it some questions. I'm going to ask it an if question. If this is true, I want it to be varies. If this is not true, I want it to use the value from over here. So I'm going to put an if statement. This is a pretty typical Revit, or true Revit and Excel if statement. So if this cell equals true, and I'm going to put it in exactly the same caps and smalls. So over here where it says true, it's uppercase T, lowercase ru. And so if F4, this cell here, equals this exact string, this exact value of true, what I'm going to do is put comma, and I'm going to put in an absolute value of varies. I'm going to have it not put in the word true, but have it put in the word varies. Otherwise, if it's not true, I just want it to use this value from over here. So that's what I want to do. So it's going to go through this entire column, and it's going to put that logic in. Now, this value over here doesn't have anything yet, and because it doesn't have anything yet, it's just going to go through and put varies only where there's the word true. Otherwise, it's going to be blanked out for right now. That's okay. Now, I'm going to take these settings, and I'm going to save them. And I'm going to save them because I want to run them easily. I've already gone through and done all this work. I want to be able to run this as easily as I possibly can. So I'm going to go through and say save settings, and I'm going to save these to an external file. I'm going to save them onto my desktop here for right now. These will be my ceiling height calculations. Yes, I spelled that right, I believe. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save that. So it saved that file externally, and I'm not even going to apply this. I'm just going to shut it down. So I'm going to say, no, don't save my changes because I already did. So now let's see if we can get this to work. What I'm going to do is run this extra tool over here. So if you went through as, say, an interior designer expert or as an Excel expert, maybe you're helping out the interior design team, maybe you're a Revit expert, either way, you can set this up, and ultimately anybody then, whether they understand the process or not, can go over here to the spreadsheet link, and they can load their settings from a file and go grab their ceiling height calculations down here and open that up. What it's going to do when I apply my settings, it's going to go through the first time, and it's going to fill out my room ceiling height 1 portion where it does my calculated ceiling height. It's going to calculate this out first. Hopefully, there it goes. So this is all calculated out. It updated 308 rooms. And then what I'm going to do is come back and run it one more time, because now that this thing has value, I'm going to try and get that value copied over to here if it's not told to be a varying ceiling height. So I can go through and say Spreadsheet Link Express, load my same exact settings, and apply those, and it's going to rerun everything again and hopefully copy the value over to here, and hopefully it has the same formatting as what I'm seeing over here. Probably won't. We'll find out. I'm saying probably won't because usually we export information in decimal feet. But in this case, it updated 172 objects, and look at that. It actually did work. It worked 100%. Copied my information directly across, except for where somebody checked varies. So now an interior designer can go through and go, oh yeah, our training room over here has got soffits in it, so we're just going to check varies for these two. And you know what? In that corridor, that's got varying ceiling heights, or it's open to above. Maybe the vestibule, maybe the entry space up here, the receptionist and this vestibule over here, they've all got varying ceiling heights. So they can check those boxes, and then from the Revit Express tools, just come back here periodically, load their settings from a file, and grab those ceiling height calculations. And in the background, it's doing all the magic. It's doing all the logic and thinking about everything that I just told it to do, and it's recalculating out ceiling heights, and it's recalculating out whether it's supposed to be varies here or not, depending on what the options happen to be. So in this case, it updated 42 rooms. These all now say varies, and these ceiling heights here are all up to date as well. So a little bit more complex of something, but the interior design team now, all they have to worry about is running that Spreadsheet Link Express property to go, and I can just go right back here to my finish schedule now, and my finish schedule also has that right information. They don't have to worry about those two schedules. They never have to actually look at them. From the finish schedule, if they decide they want to make a change to this, or they're working on a room directly and realize that it has a varying ceiling height, they can check that one box. I could even include it here in my ceilings or my room finish schedule temporarily, and make it a hidden field before printing. But all they have to do is run that routine twice, and then it goes through, and it's pretty quick. It goes through and updates all of my ceiling heights instead of them trying to do it all manually. Again, it grabs the upper elevation of the ceiling. So there was a follow-up question before about the calculations and how I was doing this, and the individual said that the problem is that there's an existing parameter that's in electrical, and you need the ability to, fill it out with either one value or another value, and it's text. And they were wondering how I did that. Hopefully that gave you an answer as to how I actually went through and was able to pull two different values using an if statement in Spreadsheet Link to fill out a value. In fact, you can even do concatenation. You can do formatting of multiple strings pulled together. So if I wanted to say, for example, in the electrical voltage parameter that's pre-existing, that's text, I could say with a text string, it's 208 /120 parenthesis 3 or parenthesis 1 or whatever I wanted for different phasing. So I could actually fill out that voltage text string with something that way using, again, Excel and formatting it from other properties on an object. So similar to what I'm doing here for the interior design, the ability to pull in either text or a value from someplace else, or again, I could combine them together. I could actually list multiple ceiling heights here if I had a way of obtaining that information. There was a comment that said it would be nice if somehow within Revit directly I could bind a room and ceiling schedule together. Obviously, the room itself is somehow tied to the ceiling. It's being bound by it. And I looked at that, man. I really tried. I wanted to find out what the individual bounding objects were. Unfortunately, Spreadsheet Link doesn't have the ability to show that to you. I really wanted to use that as my method. but there's no way of very easily, at least within Spreadsheet Link, finding that information out. So I ended up having to fall back on using the bounding box and the insertion point, and I could find the upper limit of Z, and I could find the placement elevation of Z, and I could do some subtraction there. It's something that I'd like to talk with my development team and look at in the future. The problem is it's really hard to find out what the boundary objects are for a room and understand, how to present that back to you, and how you can meaningfully use that information to look something else up. So I'll show an example in a moment here of how you might be able to do that if we are able to expose that information to you in a meaningful way in the Spreadsheet Link interface. Right now, we are going after a lot of hidden values, and I know that Revit knows what objects bound that room. It's just how can we present it back to you? We don't know yet, so it would be nice, but we can't do that with Spreadsheet Link right now. And so another individual said that in their Revit model, the volume of the room is not controlled by the ceiling object. So the ceiling itself has the room boundary on, but the limit offset basically is what's calculating the height of the room. And that's fine. If you've got a limit offset, a top limit offset on that room, and you're carefully controlling that, you can use that directly in Revit. You don't even need to run extra math if you're actually leveraging it. If you're just letting it go from level to level, and that's 14 feet or 16 feet or whatever that space happens to be. If you're doing that, but you also have ceilings in your space that are limiting it off the true ceiling height, in that case, you need to run some extra calculation. But if you're carefully going in there and saying, oh, my room is this tall, it's 14 feet tall, or it's 12 feet tall, or it's 9 feet tall, fantastic. You can actually grab that property directly. On a room, there is a property called the unbound height, and that is schedule capable. That can show up. And by default, though, if your room goes level to level, that unbound height is the height level to level. It does not report back what the ceiling elevation is, unfortunately. So, all right. So hopefully that answered all the questions so far. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next workflow here. I'm going to jump back over to my PowerPoint real quick here, and that was the example for room data sheets. Now, this is a much more complex example. This is one where I've got furniture placed into a room, and I could do this for casework, and I could do this for lighting fixtures, and I could even do this for the room materials if I wanted to. But what I'm going to do is for the furniture specifically. I want to get, for my rooms, I want to list my room out, so I want to know what the room number is, I want to know what the room name is, and then what I want to do is I want to have a single row of information with columns. The columns are going to be casework in room, furniture in room, lighting fixtures in room, finishes on room surfaces, or something like that, right? So I can just get the essential information about a single room in a single row in a single schedule. And that way I can take that out to Excel. I can manipulate it in other ways, or at least present it in different meaningful ways. This is a very simplistic example of a room data sheet, but I wanted to kind of take and show you that with the power of Excel, you can actually do some pretty complex things in Revit. Revit understands a lot of information about a lot of different objects, and it understands a lot of those relationships. And some of those relationships, not all, because we just talked about the ceiling height to room height thing, but a lot of those objects we can actually get those associations through Spreadsheet Link and do some extra powerful lookups. Now, for this particular example, I'm not going to show you all of the background smoke and mirrors that I did. And the reason why is because it's quite complex, and if you want to know more about it, I can set up a presentation with you specifically on exactly what I did, if this is a meaningful workflow for you. But I want to show you what the workflow is that I've come up with, not how to set it up, okay? I'll show you a little bit of the setup, but for the most part, it's going to be just the workflow. Because again, it's kind of complex. If you want to know more, I'll be more than happy to show it to you. So what I have here, I have a furniture schedule. And in this furniture schedule, I've currently broken it out by room. So I do, in Revit, have the ability to understand what room number and name exists, what the furniture is inside that room. And I could even do some things where I could combine these together and not itemize every instance and get some totals. And there's some things I can do there. But ultimately, I can get a list of furniture and I know what room it's in. The problem is, as I mentioned before, I want a single row for each room, and I want to have not just the furniture, but the casework and the lighting fixtures and perhaps all finishes eventually show up inside of there. Now, for today's purposes, I'm going to make a single row, which I've actually got down here. I've got a room data sheet schedule pre-built. It tells me what level I'm on, tells me what the room number is, the name, the area of the room, the square footage that is. And then I've got finishes. I've got furniture. This is going to be a list of furniture row by row. And I only want a single entry. Notice over here, if I go back to my furniture schedule, there's a number of these chair brewers inside this one space. I only want to have this entered once, and I want to have this table entered once. Most of my spaces, because this is a relatively small model, have 2, maybe 3 pieces of furniture in them. And I only want to list them out once. And what I'm going to pull is the family and type name right here, and that's going to be it for now. But I could pull a lot of other information like the manufacturer and the model numbers and concatenate those together and do a lot more complex things. For my purposes right now, I'm just going to, in my room data sheet schedule here in Revit, I want to have a list, the family and type names listed out here, and I want to have one on each row for this and have it automatically word wrap for me. So I wrote a routine yesterday that it's a custom function, a user-defined function inside of Excel that does some work. It's very slow. It's very clunky right now, but it's a lot faster than me manually trying to type this information out and trying to copy-paste stuff here. So let me show you what that workflow looks like. In my Revit Express tools here at the top, on my spreadsheet link, I have saved some settings directly to my project. So I'm going to load my settings here from my project, and it's my room data sheets little set of settings here. Now, these room data sheets here, it knows because I've done an advanced save. If you want to know more about the advanced save, we actually talked about that in a previous webinar on how to do advanced saved settings inside of Spreadsheet Link, and we can rehash that later on if you want to as well, if you give me some feedback on that, talking about more examples. But I did an advanced save. What that does is it knows which template spreadsheet it should open. That's important because that template spreadsheet has a custom macro in it that I wrote that knows how to do some of this work because Excel by itself can't do this natively. So I have to do this with some extra programming inside Excel even. But what I'm going to do is pull up this room data sheets here, this saved set of settings, and it knows, again, which spreadsheet to open, and it knows which 2 schedules it is I'm trying to export. So it's going through the process right now of grabbing the data from my project. It's grabbing my room information right here, and it's now grabbing my furniture data on the next process here. It's going through that little exercise right now. On my room information, I've already, because of my saved settings, I know that I'm pre-calculating out a combined name and number field right here on column F. And then for my furniture manual properties here, I'm using that as a lookup when I get into Excel. So again, I've got 2 exports, my room data sheet, which is giving me my room name and number, just combining these 2 together. And that's because on my furniture schedule, when I'm tracking the room, it tracks it with the name and number. So I'm using this as a key field. I know exactly which room these pieces of furniture exist in. That's a field that I can grab with Excel, or with our spreadsheet link right here. If I go to my furniture schedule, there's a room property right here that you can pull across. This is true for many objects. For doors, I think you can get the to and from room option. For furniture, for casework, for lighting fixtures, you can get that room property. It knows what room it's in. We report it like this, the name and the number. So what I have to do for a key field to make this match up is I made myself a combined name and number, and it looks pretty much the same, so I can look up from this information. So over here is where my formula is. Now, Spreadsheet Link doesn't have the ability to leverage macros from a workbook right now. That's a wish that I've got on the list. It might do that in the future, but for right now, it doesn't leverage Excel's custom VBA macros. So because of that, I'm going to have to save this out and open it up in Excel and let Excel actually run through and do that formula to give me a value back. So I'm going to go ahead and open this or save this out to Excel. So save. And I'm going to save this out as an XLSM. It's a macro-enabled file here on my desktop. I'm just going to overwrite this file right here. And I'm going to save that out. And before I do, I'm going to try to make this as rapid as I possibly can. I just want to know what cells I have, cell 4 down through cell 213. Okay, so that's important. I'm going to update my little formula here. I'm going to modify this to say $4 to, I forgot what that number was, $253. 253, I think that's what it was. Let's just double check real quick here. 213. Okay, so it's fewer than 253. That's good. 213. Knew it ended in a 3. All right, I'm putting the dollar sign there so as it propagates down, it doesn't increment these values because I don't want it doing that. So I'm going to hit enter, and it's going to propagate that down all the way here. It's going to keep using that exact same C4 to E213 reference, and hopefully that'll make this thing a little bit faster when I save this out. Again, it's looking up from this field, trying to look over here and finding matching rooms, and then it's going to copy this value across, and it's only going to get one entry for each individual unique instance. That's my goal here. So once again, I'm going to save this out again as an XLSM macro-enabled file. I'm going to go ahead and replace that. And I'm going to go ahead and open this up. Now, if I open this up, I'm a little concerned because I think this is going to actually slow my computer down quite a bit. Again, like I said, it's fairly clunky. It's really sloppy the way that I wrote that VBA routine. So it might not work quite right. It might be, oh, look at that. It did it really quickly. That's fantastic. That was actually really a lot better than I was expecting. Now, I didn't put any error trapping in here, so I'm going to have some values show up because some of these rooms don't have any furniture in them at all, like the data closet. No furniture. Work area probably should have furniture, but it's probably got furniture systems instead, and I didn't do a lookup for that. No big deal. What I'm going to do is save this out. I'm going to do a save as to my desktop as an XLSX file. And I'm doing this just so I can replace the one that's there. So it's this guy, the Spreadsheet Link settings file right here. I'm saving it as a macro-free workbook on purpose so that I can take this column right here and I can copy it and paste it as values because, again, Spreadsheet Link doesn't understand this formula that's inside of here, so I have to replace it with just the core values. So I'm going to unprotect this sheet real quick, and I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to paste this as values right back in there. So basically, it gives me just the individual values row by row by row. All right. Now that that's done, I can reapply this back inside of Revit. I did warn you, it's kind of a clunky workflow, but it's much faster for me to get this information that way than it is for me to manually type it out on each of these rows. So I'm going to reopen that workbook. Specifically, this time it's going to be an XLSX file, the one that doesn't have that math in it. And I believe it's this guy right here. And so it's now got my values inside of there. It's all been calculated out, so I can see, what the different values are. There are multiple rows of information. If I click on this here, you'll notice that it's all written out here on a big long row. This row up here isn't showing me the carriage returns, even though there are actually carriage returns in there in each of the rows. Let me apply the active worksheet back to my project here real quick. It's going to update 154 objects, 154 rooms in my project. I'm going to shut this down. So now that I've done that, I do have those individual values inside of here. I'm going to pull this column quite a bit wider so you can actually see there's all my information inside of here. You can see that it doesn't have long rows of information. It does have long names because it's the family name and the type name. But what I'm going to do is drop this onto a sheet and show you how this formats out. Again, I wasn't very careful about getting rid of that hashtag value property here, the # value. But with a little bit of extra work, I could probably clean that up. But let's throw this on a sheet and see what it looks like. If I go down here to my sheets, I'm going to build a new I sheet. We'll do an I601 for some schedules. And we'll use a basic sheet here. This will be I601. And this will be interiors, schedules. All right, interiors. Yeah. All right. So what I'm going to do is grab my room data sheet schedule and drop it onto this sheet here. And I'll kind of drop it out there. I might have to take my room names and expand them out a little bit. Some of those are a little bit long and have some goofy formatting. Ultimately, what I'm going to do also is take this schedule. I'm going to split it into two so I can have them all on one sheet right here. And what you'll notice is that for those rooms, 118, specifically this training room, it's got 4 different kinds of furniture inside of there. Actually, it's probably got 2 because that's probably a word wrap right there. I probably have to pull that column a little wider. But I've got those individual components listed out inside of here, and it pulled it automatically, for the most part, using Spreadsheet Link. Now, again, I could repeat this process and have another one set up for all the finishes to be listed out on a room-by-room basis. All of the casework could be listed out. All the lighting that's within the space could be listed automatically here as well. And so that I could have a sort of a data sheet of sorts that lists me the room number. I could filter it by room number if I wanted to as well, but I'd have the room number, I'd have the room name, the square footage, and then I'd have all the finishes and the furnishings and equipment that I cared about having inside that space that I, as an interior designer, am trying to track. That's kind of a rough example. Hopefully it's a little bit meaningful. But you could definitely see how by leveraging Excel and a little bit of extra work, you could certainly get some pretty powerful information to be displayed directly inside of Revit while still doing the vast majority of the work inside Excel.